I am very honored to be here. It's not every day you get to sit down with a Super Bowl champion and a man of your caliber. So Burgess, it is a pleasure to be here in your home.
Jimmy, I'm looking forward to it. We have some great topics. I hope everybody stays tuned. It's going to be a lot of fun for sure.
Well, you have really, as I was, more and more starting to study your message, one thing I learned about you is you are very much about personal accountability, working hard. And when you work hard on your own life, life seems to be easier on you. When you take it easy on your own life, life seems to be harder on you. And that's something that I feel like a message that you have really tried to share with your audience over the last several years.
And, I was fortunate, and we'll talk about this a little bit of my history, but I was fortunate to grow up when I did in the 1960s, Deep South, the days of segregation, Jim Crow. But what we had as a community not only was very successful, which we'll talk about, but one is just grateful to be American. So with all the things that you hear that I've done, obviously there's always a lot of backstory behind it. It's not always as easy as it seems, but at the end of the day, no matter how it happens, if you feel gratitude for getting there and for all the people and for a great God who's allowed you to experience this thing called America, there's nothing like it. You can always overcome all obstacles with that.
Well, and I think that community base, I'm glad you started with that, because give us an idea what it was like growing up in the 60s in the Deep South. You're a black man.
Okay.
I think you hear so many different versions of everything, but one thing that you always talk about is that gratitude for the community and that home that you felt as an American.
I think what we have to recognize, because I'm going to go through some history that many of your audience have no idea, they're clueless about how successful the black community was, and it's done on purpose. Back in the 1800s, Karl Marx, the founder of socialism, one of the authors of the Communist Manifesto, made a statement that we really should keep in mind, and we can see, if you study our history, that it's come to fruition. He said the first battleground is rewriting of history. If you take away our history, you take away also our vision for our future and our pride in our past. And that's exactly what leftists have done, particularly to the black community. And all we are is a precursor of what is now happening to our country. The black community is an example, because it doesn't matter how we got here. Every American has a different story. It's always been tough. We happen to be the only community, I would say, that came here by force. But we also, because of those dark days of slavery, we came out of that with such a strong belief and faith in our country and God, in the family unit. We were truly the example of what can happen in our country throughout the first part of the 1900s. Within 40 years after slavery, in 1905, there's a little college called Tuskegee Institute, started by Booker T. Washington in the middle of the Deep South, Alabama. It led our nation at producing more self-made millionaires than Harvard, Yale, and Princeton combined. The first self-made female millionaire in our country was Madam C.J. Walker, a black woman. We had a little town called Black Wall Street, outside of Tulsa, Tulsa, Oklahoma, that had over 60 millionaires. They had a tremendous amount of success. They had a international commerce business. This was from 1900 to 1920, and it was truly leading our country. Think about this. In the state of Oklahoma, there's only 2 airports. And in the 2 airports, 6 of the private planes owned in one of those airports was by black Americans. This is early 1900s. We don't hear about it because they were erased off the face of the earth within 12 hours by the Democratic KKK in Tulsa, Alabama. Over 3,000 black Americans were killed on that time. And even though they did rebound somewhat, it never came back to that great community it was. And that's actually been the fight that our community has gone through for quite a while. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a time where, because it was segregated, there was a real strong urge toward free market entrepreneurs. Matter of fact, at the time, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the black community led our country in terms of the growth of the middle class, in terms of the percentage of entrepreneurs, percentage of men committed to marriage, over 70%, men committed to education. So there was a community that truly was about high expectations. We not only expected to win, we knew, there's no question, it was an obligation to win, whether in our community or outside of it. So what I did to go to the University of Miami to get a biology degree was because that was my dreams. And my parents and that generation told us, you dream big, and whatever you want to get accomplished, you can get done. It is amazing, again, the success that came out of that time. And that's what actually drives me today, because I've lived it firsthand. I know what the possibilities are with my race and our country. And to see what's happening now, it just leads me to having such a passion to get it back. So we will get it back because that's what we do as Americans. Once we understand we're in a fight, we fight our fight and we win our fights. We have to just realize we're there.
So there's so much preconception of what's actually good for the Black community, I think. And that's what you have spent your life, these last several years fighting against, is this preconceived notion that they're oppressed or they have all these issues that they need to stay oppressed. So how do you help them rebound and get out of the stigma of where it's been at?
Well, first of all, it comes down to education. Second of all, it's telling white Americans that the worst thing you do to any American is to put them down and make them feel like a second class. For anybody to tell me that our race is oppressed, our race is one in which cannot do, that we are hapless, hopeless, and wait for the white race to take care of us is an insult. It's the greatest insult that can be given to my parents' generation. They wouldn't stand for it. Their goal very simply was not to sit back and wait for somebody to do for them. Their goal was first of all to succeed themselves. And keep in mind those things I just mentioned. 40s, 50s, and 60s, during a time of the strongest institutional racism, and they were kicking butt big time. Mm-hmm. They expected that of their kids, so we taught us the same principles of how to win and overcome. And the most important thing is they never want us to be victims. The greatest insult to any American is to have somebody to look at them as someone who cannot overcome, who cannot achieve, that don't have the ability and the powers and the wherewithal to be as good as anyone else. What makes America great is our power to dream. Every one of us, no matter what obstacles are, and believe me, everyone has them, has that one thing in this country, the ability to see out in front of them a middle class that some kind of way you feel you can get there. And that middle class are those folks who just came from the same background, struggling, trying to make it happen. All of a sudden, have a little extra money in the bank, have a little bit, now afford a home, now afford to take their kids to college. But they have an empathy for those folks who are not there yet because they just came from there. Mm. And they are the ones that encourage and open the doorway for our poorest among us to become one day middle class. And that's what's made our country great. Our middle class was the best, the strongest in our country when I was growing up. 40% of us, Black Americans, are part of the middle class because everything within our community stayed there. Mm. Our money stayed within our community. Our leadership stayed within our community. When those who went out and became successful, became educated, they came back and helped their kids to do the same thing. We weren't taking our energies and spreading it all across the country because somebody convinced us that the white community is the place to grow up and be. Mm. We believed in our communities and we were strongly making it happen. And because of the leftists, and I'll talk about NAACP in a little bit, they were at the very front of the demise of our race. And we'll talk about that because I want to get into details at some point.
Yeah, no, we'll get into that. I do want to get a little more of your story because I think one of the things that you've got two really popular books now, one that's called Liberalism, How to Turn Men into
Whiners, Weenies,
and Wimps, right? And then your other one, Why I Stand, which was kind of more relevant to the current NFL situation with Colin Kaepernick and everything else. This is From Freedom to the Killing Fields of Socialism. And so you have so much to say about all these topics. And really listening and reading your books, I came to understand much more deep why this is so important to you and how many things have happened to get to a position where you said where 70% of the Blacks used to be married. And now it's the opposite, right?
It's reversed. All those things I just mentioned, I'm glad you bring that up, Jimmy, because everything I just mentioned, all the success we had during the roughest of times, the 40s, the 50s, and 60s, leading our country in terms of producing millionaires, having great communities that were out there providing and servicing our own communities. We now turn to the opposite side where 70% plus of our men now leave their families, do not support their kids. We have 83% of Black teen males over the last 8 years, particularly in the Obama years, cannot find jobs and become not only unemployed, but unemployable. Mm-hmm. You have over 20 million since 1973 Black babies being aborted. Now, you have to understand, not only is there death, by the way, that's about 40% of today's population, Black population. So not only is there death within the Black community, but more importantly, it's what it does, the devastating impact it has on motherhood. Mothers that are taught and believe that abortion is nothing but another form of health care, they lose so much of what makes our country great. That is the core of our country, is the motherhood, is that the ability to nurture, to have as close to unconditional love as possible, we'll find in our country is done through motherhood. Those who will actually give those husbands and those sons an incentive to become better than they've ever have been, it comes from motherhood. And what it has done, the leftists have destroyed motherhood within our society. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you think about 70% plus of our young men and older men who do not see fit to provide for their own kids. That's the destruction of fatherhood. So what leftists have done on purpose is taken away the real core of what made our country, our society, my community, a great one, and are now attacking our society in the same way. So it's not just the black community now. It's all communities that deal with the same issues of not understanding the importance of our kids and not importance of our relationship to a God in heaven that says we can overcome anything. So that's our fight. And because I've seen it firsthand, I know what we're capable of. It's been my mission, very simply, to make sure our kids realize that they understand that they're in the greatest country in history of mankind, and they can do anything they want to if they decide to.
Well, and I think one thing that I've learned as I got older and older is that power of a strong father figure in a young boy's life or a young woman's life, right? And I mean, you became a first-team All-American at Miami. You were a first-round draft pick in the NFL, had a very successful career in the NFL. What kind of principles did you have from your father? How did he help raise you to? Because I know what kind of hard work and what kind of determination has to go into becoming the athlete that you did.
You know, Jimmy, that's a great question. It's a great lead-in with your father was all, because basically I had the same blessings. Thank goodness I had a father who was, first of all, a hard worker, didn't make excuses. When knocked down, taught us to get back up. And matter of fact, one of the greatest lessons he taught me as I was getting into football, my sophomore year in high school, I was a running back. And I was one of 4 black athletes that was integrating this formerly all-white school. If you remember the movie, Remember the Titans. Of course. It's kind of the same type movie. Okay. And
what years are these, by the way?
This was in 80. I'm sorry. I wish. This was in 69, I believe. 69, yeah.
Okay. So right in the middle of all of the everything.
We were the first to integrate this high school. When I went to the University of Miami, I was the 3rd black athlete to sign a scholarship with the University of Miami. So that was the era. And by the way, me being the 3rd and Chuck Foreman being the 4th, we led the entire South in terms of black recruitment. So it gives you an idea how far we've come. But what happened is I was a running back as a sophomore. There was a junior linebacker, Larry Strickland. Larry was just as tough as nails. He was a consummate linebacker, all state. Kind of guy you want on his team as long as he likes you. Problem, he didn't like us very much. So he was a bully. And Larry would do everything he could at the end of a play to try to hurt me. And I remember talking to my dad about, he said, this guy just won't quit. And Dad's advice very simply was this. He said, Virgie, what I want you to do the next time you practice, you get the ball as a running back. I want you to find the hole. And as you get to the hole, find Larry. And I want you to run at Larry as hard and fast as you can and hit him. And that was a little different approach. My idea of seeing Larry is go the opposite way.
Yeah, sure.
But I did that. I know that I ran at Larry as hard as I could, fast as I could, hit him as hard as I could. But it was to the point where the coach actually thought I was trying to start a fight. And it took Larry by surprise because no one had never addressed him like that or challenged him like that. Now, it didn't change his heart automatically, but it started a process of respect to see that happen. For me, it was also a process of, well, a couple of things. A few years later, Larry and I happened to be in the same All-Star game together, North-South All-Star. And he had actually grown up so much. I remember him coming into a room of players after practice, and he was the only white guy that was there. But yet here he was. He had overcome that because he'd grown up. What I learned very simply was a lesson of how to deal with fear. You see fear, and this is what my dad was teaching me, is you attack it. You go at it as hard as you can and hit it as hard as you can. And no matter what that fear is, eventually you will tame it. You will get respect, and you'll respect yourself for overcoming. One of the things I do now, I speak. That was the thing that scared me the most when I was in high school. But I learned to attack it. And eventually I went through studying through a prepared speech, trembling hands to where I can now speak comfortably. That's the way faith works, and that's the way fear works. And the lessons that my dad taught were those lessons of the generation of how to attack those kind of issues, and also that we can make a difference. So I'm just very proud and happy to have grown up during that period. For those who have dads today, that really stand up and man up. they're really blessed. And you take advantage of that and make sure that we get the message out that that's the way we should all be, and not fall back and quit and be whiners, winnies, and wimps.
Well, what a beautiful message, and to have your dad teach you those lessons as a young man, and it's benefited you your entire life. So you went through Miami. You're now in their Hall of Fame. I mean, this is the U. Yeah. You know, you don't even have to give them another name. That this is the university.
The first U, before the other U start happening, right? Okay.
And then you go drafted first round. You went to the Jets. Was Joe Namath your quarterback?
Yeah, Joe was there for my first 3 years.
Okay.
And at that time, Joe was at the very tail end of his career, so we were not a winning team. So as much as I'm proud to say I played with Joe, I can also say we were a lousy team.
Well, if you go look back at the stats compared to nowadays, the way the stats look, you see like, wait, that's one of the all-time greats, but it's just a different game back then.
There we go. It was a different game for sure.
So you played for those full 10 years, and it was, I guess, what season was your Super Bowl year with the Raiders?
Season was 1983. I would play for the Jets for 7 years. I was very fortunate to then be traded to the Raiders. And for those who listen to the podcast, yes, there was a day in which the Raiders used to win a lot of football games.
Oh, they were the best.
They were the best. They were, in essence, what the Patriots are today, a team that will always be in the playoffs, a team that every player wanted to be part of. The difference was the Raiders also was the team of outlaws. It was a team where players who were too old, too rambunctious, too rebellious to play any place else found themselves at home with the Raiders. So it was kind of the last stop. And the great thing about being at the last stop, you realize, if I don't make it here, this is it. So it was a very humbling process. There was a culture that you did everything you could to be part of it. And there's a lot of pride about calling yourself a Raider. There was nothing like it.
How did they develop that team pride or that team chemistry that you guys had? Because I think that everybody knows those Raiders years, that John Madden was coaching you guys up, and you guys just had a camaraderie. It's known as one of those teams that just loved each other and fought, like you said, kind of a band of misfits. How did you create such a powerful team culture?
It was interesting because we just had the honor of being part of it. The creator of that was Al Davis. And Al Davis, Pete Rozelle, many of the great coaches and owners during that period came out of that war. Now, I was a little bit too young to fight, but was old enough to know results of it. And you have Pete Rozelle, who actually was a sailor during the World War II. My dad was also an army during the World War II. So coming out of that war was an attitude of pride in country and understanding what America stood for. And for many of us, it was a chance to finally get past the exterior. Whether it be in war, on a football field, or sports, we begin to see the advantage of looking at inside out versus outside in. Because character is what's going to help you win. And at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to with these teams. It's all about winning. And you can care less the color, the religion, whoever else next to you. As long as they help you just win, baby, you're happy. So Al Davis had an attitude. He could care less about the things that other people were caring about. So he had the first black quarterback. The first black coach, the first woman CEO, whatever it was. He just led because he cared about what helps him to win. But more importantly, that was a team of second chances. I would say of all the things that I remember about the Raiders, it exemplified our country, because our nation is a place that says you always have a second chance. Just get up one more time, and if you keep at it, going at it, you learn your lessons, you be the best person you can be, you will win at the end. And that was Al's attitude. He could care less about the excuses. He can care less about all that stuff that other people cared about. When you showed up on his field and you gave everything you can give, and you had that attitude of just win, baby, you would become a Raider. And once a Raider, always a Raider. That was Al. I
love that. It's funny because you hear as he got older, the team kind of fell apart a little bit. But you hear people talk with such a reverence when they talk about Al Davis and how he built that Raiders dynasty in that time frame. I
would say of the things that I'm most proud of, because obviously, it took a while to get there. I went through a lot of years of losing. University of Miami were losing those 2 years. I never had a winning season with Miami. Never had a winning season with the Jets. So after 12 years of losing, to get to the Raiders and to be part of not only a Super Bowl team that was underdogs, and that's another lesson. What made that year greatest than anything else was the lesson of what happens to underdogs if you hang in there. Nobody expected us to win.
Who were you playing in Super Bowl 15, right?
Super Bowl 15 against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Okay.
And every single game, we got there as a wild card. Every game we were supposed to lose. And every game we kind of came to the plate and we ended up winning. And that brought us together as a team that it's hard to explain that camaraderie that comes when everybody else believes you're going to fall short. But inside, you know, you have what it takes to win. And I hope for everybody who listens to this, that you have the opportunity to one day be an underdog, to fight through it and win, because it takes you to a different level, a different plane than just winning normally. It says that you understand what it feels like that nobody else believes, but you do. And you know some kind of way you can come through it all. And when you have that, you can overcome all of the obstacles in the future.
Well, I think that's a lot of what your message is this idea. One of the things that I've always taught people and try to preach is when you give people something or if something comes easy, just the human nature is to take advantage of that thing, right? We don't actually appreciate the way that we should. But when you have to earn something, when you have to go out and you get something and you know, people were betting against you and you made it happen, there's a pride that comes from that that helps you in every aspect of your life going forward. You know, I remember when I was at a young age, had over $100,000 debt from a bad business decision. And I could have just, you know, bankrupted out of it or whatever. I said, you know what, I'm just going to pay this off. To me, that wasn't an option to bankrupt out of it. And little by little, I paid that thing off. And now it's like nothing financially can possibly scare me because I was staring more debt in my face than I ever imagined at that age. And when the self-pride or the sense of accomplishment when I actually worked through that and realized it was the best thing I ever did because I had to work so hard that it actually set up my entire business career going forward by working that hard and building that base.
You actually summarized why the last generation that raised us did such a great job and what we have to do to get back to that greatness. First of all, there's pride in work. There's pride in being knocked down and then and understanding what you're willing to do to get back up again. And only when you go through the toughest of times can you learn the great lessons of life. And one of the things I talk about whenever I give a chance to speak is something I call the 13th season. And just to highlight it real quickly, I talk about my last year in high school, the 4 years in college, the 7 years with the Jets, all losing seasons, all very discouraging after a while because there's a point in which being a total optimist just gets old. You want to win. You want that scoreboard to tell you you're actually a winner, not a loser. And our 13th season was the year we went to the Raiders. And the message I give is that everyone is entitled and will one day get to the 13th season where things just seem to work out, where you just made at that one moment say, I'm just so glad I hung through there and I made it happen. Here I am. It's all worth it. But it's the 12 years before that represent the true learning stepping stones for us. And that's where you learn about empathy and pride and loyalty and love, all the things that really make us who we are in a very positive way. It comes to those toughest times, as long as you don't quit. And that's the biggest lesson that any of us who are making it in industry, any industry, no matter what business we're in, everyone has gone through failure if they're there. And if you learn those lessons from the failure and let other people know that if I can do it, you can do it, then truly that is the essence of why we're going through it all.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the lesson that you don't know that you need or want, but once you go through it, I've never heard somebody say they would have it any other way. Yeah. Because it gives you that sense of accomplishment and achievement and everything.
It gives you that 13th season. I went through the same thing. At the NFL, actually, I left my 10th year. It was one of my better seasons. Not only was an alternate All-Pro, led the Raiders in interceptions that year, but also it was my what is it? When you have a new contract, I was a free agent.
Free agent year, okay.
And I was so, first of all, I was kind of getting tired of the game, but I was so confident about this business I was going to run that I felt if I can work my business as hard as I worked in the NFL, I can overcome anything. I can become very, very successful. So 7 years later, when the business didn't work out, I was very surprised. Very humbling experience. One that I really needed because, again, we all have that tendency of thinking that we can pull anything off if we work hard enough. And we went bankrupt. I remember moving my family into this little basement of an apartment, 4 kids, and it was a remarkable, humbling experience. Only for a few months, but during that time, I did a little time with as a chimney sweep as a security guard, all experiences that I'm glad I went through, because today I can tell anyone, it doesn't matter where you come from. I was extremely sweep after I was an NFL player, and yet I've made it through. And I remember a moment, a very defining moment, and standing in the basement of that apartment, kind of looking at that window, that street level window, hearing gunshots outside, and thinking the benefits and the blessings I had over my next door neighbor, which was, I knew this was temporary. I knew this wasn't going to last because I was going to make sure it wouldn't last. And that's the message, is that our downtimes can be temporary if we're willing to learn from it and really understand and see on the other side of it. On the other side of it, that's why I always say dream big, because we can dream past our obstacles if we just go for it. In this country, can't say that if I was in any other place around the world, but in this country, you can outdream every obstacle we have and be a benefit at the end of the day because of it.
Well, I think it's a powerful part of your story is it's not like it was just this success over and over and over, right? I mean, you had, failure, and then you had success, and then again, you got knocked back down and you got back up again. It's like you said, as long as you don't ever give up, we live in a miraculous time and place where you truly get chance after chance after chance if you want them, if you're willing to go to the next one, right?
And the saying that failure can be our very best friend as long as you don't quit once we've been formally introduced. That's what it comes down to. It is no question the greatest lesson. And here's the other thing. I think sometimes because of this notion that life is a push of a button away from getting there, an elevator ride. Life and success is all about overcoming obstacles. And no matter who it is, I don't care what the lifestyle looks like, there's been a lot of failure on the way to getting there. The benefit to those who learn a lesson is that once they gain that success, they know what to do with it. For those who don't have a chance to benefit because it goes too quickly, and that's the problem with super fast wealth. You go from somebody who's being poor to somebody super wealthy, they don't get a chance to go through the experience of being middle class. They don't understand those nights of trying to pay bills and make strong decisions and just finally eking your way out to where you can not only appreciate it, but you have the desire to help people come back through with it. If you go from very, very poor to very, very wealthy, then there's a problem. They become what's called elitists. And elitists is the worst thing that can happen to our country because they do not understand the process of success. They look down on others. And they see themselves as many gods. They see themselves, matter of fact, for elitists, the greatest present elitists can give a person is their presence. That's the way they see it. I show up and that is good enough. Why give you money when I'm here?
Well, you talk about that a lot in your books. I kind of want to jump into that because that's actually one of the main topics in your book is this idea of the elitist class and how it's damaged the Black community. Elaborate a little bit more on what you mean on that.
Elitism is when people put themselves as many gods and they use other people to keep their power and their profitability and their prestige. And they have no shame because as far as I'm concerned, they deserve it. We've had that problem since 1910 with the beginning of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, 1910. The problem with that little club or that little organization, it wasn't started by colored people. It was started by 21 white socialist, Marxist, atheist, race-controlled Democrats. And they had in the front of them, as a facade, a black socialist, W. Du Bois. Their goal, very simply, because they could not do it any other way. The Black community at that time was very entrepreneurial, very much family-oriented, God-based, conservative, very patriotic. All the things that makes a community very, very successful, that's who they were. So the way that the leftists got in there was by using a black facade and giving a different message. The message was, why go out and become entrepreneurs, become a faith-based culture where you can ask the government to do what they deserve to do to you? Why go out and build a community, build pride, build a morality within the community where you can always demand to be part of another community? That's where integration came from. Never in the history of mankind has one man demanded the results and the profitabilities and product produce of another man. Nowhere has that ever happened before until the NAACP came around and gave black people the impression that we're entitled to somebody else's produce. So, so instead of us continually to build our country, our community, like I described with the 1960s, those who became successful because they were trained to think this way, the first thing they did is left their community and went out and moved into white communities, went out and supported white businesses, went to white colleges, and left the black community with not only that lack of leadership, but lack of success, trying to figure out how to make it happen. That middle class that's so essential to succeeding left to go out and mingle in integrated fashion and left that community behind. As opposed to doing what Booker T. Washington had suggested we do, what's happening in the NFL and NBA. Go ahead and produce, add value, command respect, not demand it, command respect by success, and it happens naturally. When you have success in a way that's done the way Booker T. Washington happened, which has happened down in Alabama in early 1900s, the biggest contributors and folks who committed to the Tuskegee were white Alabamans who wanted to buy the bricks from Tuskegee because the bricks were the best in the entire country. So and not only did they buy the bricks, but they supported Tuskegee because they gained respect for what they were doing. So at the end of the day, that process, NAACP, by the way, NAACP, interestingly, didn't have a black president for the next 65 years.
Right.
NAACP, and interestingly, the first white president was against the anti-lynching laws because he felt it was unconstitutional. By the way, that anti-lynching laws was put in place by Republicans from Kansas. So it has always been the Republican Party that has been for the black community in terms of growing and understanding the process of succeeding. It's always been the Democratic Party. It's been the party of socialism, segregation, slavery, and what's the other one? Secession. It always has been. It continues to be. And what we have to understand is that what they've been really good at is some kind of way flipping the narrative. There's some kind of way, some miraculous way in the 1960s, all the bad guys left the Democratic Party in one fashion and went to becoming Republicans. And that is now the narrative. And because people don't think through it, they accept it as gospel. So, don't want to get too political.
No, it's not a political podcast, but I think it is important to understand the history. I'm a history buff. And I think when you really dive into history, everything makes a little bit more sense. You understand the mission of the United States in World War II and why Japan was never going to surrender, and all of a sudden dropping atomic bombs makes a little bit more sense, right? When you've already bombed out the entire country and they're saying, until we take out several hundred to thousands of your soldiers with us, we're never going to. All of a sudden you realize they saved millions of lives by doing things that were hard in that moment. And so I'm a history buff because history leaves clues of success. And that's where I say that I think the worst thing you can do is teach somebody that they are a victim, because even if they're right, it doesn't serve them, right? To play that victim card. I think that's what your book, it says turning good men into whiners, wimps, and weenies, right? Yeah. So tell us a little bit, that title's so profound, so powerful. What are some of the things that you're seeing current with society that you'd like to see reversed or done differently to help men get that swagger?
I think the key is that we have to be honest about our history. And though it might be uncomfortable, at the end of the day, it's all about ideology. We have a country that's been based on Judeo-Christian values, and those are the facts. We have a country that began from the very beginning with pilgrims who not only landed here, but before stepping foot on the American soil, they inked out something called the Mayflower Compact, which is a covenant between God and man in terms of what its society would look like. No other country had done that. And because of that foundation, it has continually been a country that's been based on godly foundation. We the people, the fact that we're all equal in the eyes of God. Those things are very important to understand. If we understand that, then we can have honest conversations about those ideologies that are against that. The Judeo-Christian values that's made my country, my community, the great community it was, that many people don't hear about today, has been fighting against socialists, Marxists, and atheists from the very beginning. Our country today is fighting against socialists, Marxists, and atheists. So what liberalism does, very simply, it takes men with vision men with good hearts, men who understand their positions as the man of the house and patriot of the house, turns into being whiners and weenies and wimps, turns into being people who become entitled or feel that they're victims or feel it's okay to not take care of the family. And it is amazing. I kind of cringe when I think about what manhood has become with the leftists. And I don't know how they can live with themselves, to be honest with you. I mean, I can look myself in the mirror. If I did not see myself as being a provider, protector, and visionary for my home, my household, and all the great responsibilities that come with it, all the stress that comes with it, but all the pride that comes with it, because that's what I'm here to do. That's my responsibility. And if I am the kind of man that does not view and honor womanhood, then I can't call myself a man. That is what whiners, weenies, and wimps do, is they leave their homes and leave these good women there to defend and provide for themselves. So the book actually is about history. It's more importantly about the Black history, this one here, the first one, liberalism, that many people don't know. And it also allows Americans across the board to do a couple of things. Because my message very simply to white Americans is don't apologize. By apologizing, not only are you not understanding the great history and ancestry that you all have to make this a country that today we just had an election of a president Black president for 8 years, a place in which there's no place in society that is off limits to our dreams. If it was not for our ancestors, we would not have these opportunities. And it's also, as I said before, it's an insult to my race and to my ancestors, all the way back to my great-great-grandfather, for anybody to apologize for anything I've gone through they had nothing to do with. There's no such thing as an omnipotent race that has this great power to oppress or to release another race. We live in a country where we all can make that decision individually to go for it. The second one, why I stand, is more topical. It talks about NFL. Why it's taken 3 years for them to finally get it, that we're not going to stand for our flag being disrespected. That the fact that it's run now by leftists. That's not the same, unfortunately, same teams we watched with Al Davis in the old days. These guys today run it, they're globalists. And there's two types of globalists. There's the globalist that, first of all, sees the benefits of getting a market that's everywhere around the world. That America's not first anymore. It's wherever they got to go to make it happen. That's a globalist. And we have people that are willing to put America second because their idea for profitability is more important. The worst type of globalist are leftist globalists. Because not only do they go out and reach to find out the much wealth that they can get, but they leave behind in our country a dark abyss of socialism. They not only grab as much money as they can, but they leave behind hopelessness. And that's what's happening right now. We have people like the NFL that allows for their community, the Black community, to see young men who are making it very well, very, very wealthy, making it very well, that stand and cannot stand up and be grateful for the country they live in. Because for the last 18 years, for many of these kids, they have never seen a flag in their classroom. They've never said a prayer. They don't have a parent. They don't have a father who's going to tell them about respect. So they come out and they become little socialists and Marxists in their classrooms. If you stand on the sideline making millions of dollars, it doesn't change who you think and what you think. So we have to change that process of our education as getting our kids to that point and point out to those who take advantage of them, like the NFL commissioner, who's making $40 million per year. Only 10% of that is based on a guarantee. The other 90% is based on growth incentives. He's not going to get growth here in the United States because they're already capped out at 13 million. They're going to get their growth only by going to China, France, Mexico. There's 200 countries that they want to expand themselves into. And as they do that, then America's brand is demeaned. Think about this. They want to go into China, which is a bigger market than anything we can ever think of here. They have to, first of all, take away the American brand so it's more accepted as a neutral brand.
I think that's a part of the whole equation that most people never even register, never even think about. But it makes so much sense.
Well, because most Americans don't know how devious the leftists can be, how little bit of America they really care about. When it comes down to themselves and their profitability, they can care less about what's left behind here. So no, they're not looking out for the Black community with social justice. They're giving a message to those markets they want to go into that we're not so American after all. And to leave behind these kids who not only giving up their careers as they stand for what they believe in, but they have no idea, but they're demeaning their own brand when they leave the game, and that brand, which gives them some value, they are actually diminishing that in a fast fashion. Because nobody cares if you played in the NFL if you're not standing for our flag. I don't want you. I wouldn't hire a Colin Kaepernick, period, because he demeaned our flag at a time when he should have been standing for it. So he can forget me ever hiring him. There are people like me, by the way. Yeah, that's the problem with he's going to have as he gets through this. At some point, he realizes he's been used, abused, and discarded.
Well, I think people get stuck in their own little worlds or their own little bubbles, and they don't understand some of the bigger issues that are going on. They're either stuck on the coast or they're stuck in middle America, and you see life a lot differently if you come from, one of these different areas of the country. And I think that's why there's so much confusion and so much division within politics. People need to be able to understand the issues. I would rather, if I want to truly understand what's going on with the NFL and the flag and all those things, I need to talk to people on both sides. I need to try to understand those issues, open up communication. It actually leads to me to the last thing I want to talk to you about is you go and speak on college campuses.
Yes.
And you were recently booed to the point where you almost had to stop your speech at a campus. And I think to me, that's like the opposite of what America is. You have to be willing to let all sides speak. If Michael Moore's speaking and you're the biggest Republican in the world, you should let him speak. Yeah. If Ben Shapiro's speaking and you hate Ben Shapiro, it doesn't matter, right? It's the idea that we have to suppress ideas and people's opinions is the very root of the opposite of what this country is all about. So how did that affect you, and how do you see that communication channel, and why is that important that we keep that open?
Well, we have to understand, first of all, that you're right. Having a communication, having a back and forth is essential to growth in education. The left is not concerned about growth in education. They want our kids to be as dumb and ignorant and ill-informed as they possibly can be. You have 75% of the black boys in the state of California today. This is 2017. They cannot pass standard reading and writing tests. Now, that's done on purpose, because if kids can't think, they can't read, they can't argue, they can't debate, they can be led very easily by the emotion and whoever gets to them and do the best bit of propaganda. That's what leftists do. So the idea that we have debates is something that was old school. I remember my dad encouraging us to take another side, because at the end of the day, we can still agree to disagree and move forward, still be friends. What we have right now is an environment in which socialists, Marxists, and atheists, very intolerant people, are concerned about freedom. They're not concerned about education. And what they want to do is bully people into not talking. So if you say anything that's against their informed way of thinking, you're either called a name or you're beat up until people stop talking. The worst thing that happened during the Obama years is something called PC, in which people were afraid to say things like Merry Christmas because of this PC grouping. The greatest danger to that is someone who doesn't care about PC thinking. And so that's why we as Americans have to do a couple things. Educate ourselves, put in priority the importance of our country. It comes before our acceptance. The reason why I could care less about what people think is because my God, my family, and my country come first. And what other people think, I can care less about. Now, if we get more people thinking like that, then they lose their power to control and drive the agenda. That's why also I think so much about entrepreneurs, because what happens with people who own their own selves, they own their own business, they own themselves. They're not looking for the next good job. They're not looking for the next great political place. They can speak what they believe because no one is controlling that income flow, and they can move forward and do their own thing. So I encourage all those listening, find a way to own yourself. That way you can speak up in the way you want to. You can be yourself, no matter what side of the aisle it is. And you can also have the latitude and the tolerance, because you own yourself, to be able to hear somebody else without feeling attacked. And it's a good place for us to be.
Well, I think that's a good message to give. I know with me, I'm a very honest person with people. I let people know if I'm disappointed in them. I let people know if I disagree with them. And I've seen the benefits that have come to me from that, because people seem to trust me. They know where I stand. They know that I know who I am. And so they're not afraid to be themselves, because we have that mutual respect still.
Yeah.
I don't need to agree with you. I appreciate that you have an opinion. I have an opinion. I think it's important, though, to keep that discourse alive, to be able to have communication amongst groups. And like you said, the more education people get, the more you have to see sides of different things, the more you're going to truly understand what is best in the long run, which might not seem like it's in your best interest at the time, but really is exactly what you need.
And that's the whole thing about being an American that sometimes we take for granted. We have innately within who we are the ability to dream and vision outside of where we are now. And if you vision outside of that, then you look at all the consequences. If you envision the fact you would like to have good relationships and have a good business, for instance, you then can see the benefits of holding your tongue, of being respectful, of being okay with people who don't like you because you want them to come back. You want them to buy your business, your services. So you're able to contain yourself, be respectful, because that's what it takes to get along with people. That's a visionary. That's what entrepreneurs do. If all of a sudden you think that you're the end game, you're the everything it takes, and somebody disagrees with you, you could care less about their feelings, about long-term relationships, because you are it. And they got to turn themselves around so you can be part of who you are. And that's the problem when we have elitists. And that's what the leftists comes down to. They're smarter than anybody else. They have more insight than anybody else. They have all the answers, and boy, they can turn the tides of history if just give them a chance. So unfortunately, that is an ideology. But the great thing about people is we're not stuck in any ideology. We can change if we educate ourselves. That's why the discourse is so important. My goal very simply is not to intimidate people into believing what I believe in, but to some kind of way have this conversation where they can trust me. They can begin to look into it themselves. They can think through the process and one day say, I can see how that might work. And all of a sudden, they're not as hard on what they might have believed that could have been detrimental to themselves and our country, and more believe in the things that I think will be beneficial to our country.
Well, everybody should pick up a copy of your books. They're amazing. You're on the news a lot. I know the national programs have you on all the time. People are going to start seeing you now that they've listened to the podcast. But if people want to get more of you, Burgess, where can they buy the books at? Where should they go in order to?
Amazon is there. We have a website called Burgess Owens Talks that you can tie into. We're about to get that revamped. It's going to be a really nice website that's coming out real soon. You can also find me, of course, my website is Burgess Owens, official Burgess Owens, and my Twitter page is Burgess Owens at Burgess Owens. So please join me. We'd love to communicate with you. And here's my last message. The great thing about America is our history, that once we know in a battle, once we know we're in a fight, we are the very best people as doing what we have to do to win the fight, because we care about what our country is all about, and we believe in a God that's going to protect us and guide us. So let's just educate ourselves, gird ourselves up for a big fight for our culture, and we end up winning in the end of the day.
I love it. Thank you. This has been a pleasure for me.
My pleasure, buddy.
Thanks, Burgess.
For sure. Absolutely.